Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Moscow is under attack. They're calling it a terrorist strike by Ukraine, and Poland is feeling the heat. Wagner fighters may be preparing to attack Poland. That's what the president of Belarus says. Meanwhile, another high-profile name has fallen out of favor in Russia. A man Putin once saved from prosecution has now been jailed. Lots of ground to cover in the Russia-Ukraine war. We'll bring you up to speed with what's been happening, also the analysis. In India, the movie Oppenheimer is coming under attack for using the Bhagavad Gita in a sex scene. How did the censor board clear it? And what were the filmmakers trying to do here? We will discuss. In Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu has got a pacemaker as his country witnesses the biggest protest ever. Even the army is now speaking against the government. In Manipur, no justice for those who've been suffering and no accountability from the state government. In Japan, radioactive fish have put a question mark on the plan to release contaminated water in the sea. All those stories and more coming up. The headlines first. The curious case of China's missing foreign minister. 1 month and counting, Qing gang has not been seen in public. Speculation soars as foreign leaders cancel visits to Beijing. Former foreign minister and top diplomat Wang Yi takes up some of Qing gang's responsibilities. A night of high drama in Spain. The Conservatives win the tight election but fail to secure majority. The far-right People's Party secured 136 seats, while Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's ruling socialists got 122 seats. Spain is now headed for a hung parliament. Troubles continue for Indian startup Byju's. The edtech giant has vacated its largest office space in the city of Bengaluru. The move is being seen as a cost-cutting measure as the company grapples with financial and legal troubles. The Pacific braces for a super typhoon. Typhoon Doksuri began as a tropical storm but has intensified since then. Forecasters warn that it poses a risk to the Philippines, Taiwan, Hong Kong and China. It's time to say goodbye to the blue bird. Twitter owner Elon Musk has replaced the iconic logo with an X. Founded in 2006, the name Twitter comes from the sound of birds chirping. The company bought a stock symbol of a light blue bird for $15 in its early days. And Barbie wins the box office battle this weekend. The Greta Gerwig movie earns $337 million worldwide. It is the biggest of all time for a movie directed by a woman. Meanwhile, Oppenheimer earns $174 million globally. Hollywood's mega weekend comes as its writers and stars continue to strike. The lead story tonight comes from Russia. Drones are attacking Moscow again. The Kremlin is calling it a terror threat, a terror attack. Today, 2 drones flew into the Russian capital. Their target is said to have been the Russian military. The drones flew towards these structures near the Russian Defense Ministry. One of the buildings was damaged. It's a military university. The damage was not severe. There were no casualties, but the attack is audacious. It led to panic.
I was asleep but woke up because of an explosion. Everything had started to shake. It felt like the whole building had come down. I looked out of the window. I live in the neighboring building on the side where there's less damage. And it felt strange. The damage was so minor. Well, okay, not minor. Any explosion is scary, but it sounded worse than it looked. And it seemed like the whole mall had exploded. After that, I looked online and saw the amount of damage from this side. And we came and had a look from here.
This was an eyewitness account. They say it was scary and perhaps that was the plan all along. That was the idea, spreading fear among Russians. Moscow says the drones were intercepted and such attacks are becoming too frequent. The first such incident was reported in the month of May. There was a drone attack on the Kremlin. Since then, more drones have flown towards Moscow. And who is the attacker? Well, no side has taken responsibility, but Russia blames Ukraine for what's been happening. Today, the declaration was made on Russian television.
An attack by Ukrainian drones was prevented in Moscow in the early hours of this morning. The Defense Ministry states there were 2 drones. Specialists managed to jam them and the drones crashed without reaching their targets. No one was injured. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin noted the intercepted drones crashed into 2 uninhabited buildings. No major damage.
What did the Kremlin say? Well, a journalist asked Putin's spokesperson. The response was unambiguous. Moscow vowed to keep the fight in Ukraine going. Listen to this.
On the Moscow drone attack, will there be any response from Russia against objects in Ukraine?
The special military operation is continuing. It will go on and its goals must be achieved.
He's talking about Moscow chasing goals. Is Poland part of those goals? We ask because of the developments this weekend. The Russian president had a visitor, Alexsandr Lukashenko, the president of Belarus. Lukashenko has been a loyal ally of President Putin. He's hosting Russian nukes. And he has given refuge to Wagner soldiers. This was after an alleged coup attempt by Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin. He tried to dismantle Russia's military establishment. The coup failed and a deal was struck. Lukashenko played the mediator. Prigozhin and his soldiers were exiled to Belarus, and as we speak, some 2,500 Wagner fighters are in Belarus. Lukashenko says they're preparing for another fight, and their target this time is Poland. The Belarusian president shared the war plans with the Russian leader.
There is no counteroffensive. What's next?
It exists, but it has failed.
It has failed and there are no results. As you've said very precisely, they've started involving Poland. The Wagner guys have started to stress, allow us to go to the West. I said, why do you want to go to the West? We are silently watching what is going on. Well, we'll go for a sightseeing tour to Warsaw. That's what they said.
Now, this is not the first time that Poland has been mentioned as a potential target. Last week, there was a Security Council meeting in Moscow. Putin went after Poland in that meeting. He said Poland was trying to capture territories in Belarus and that Russia won't shy away from taking action against it.
In 1939, Poland was abandoned by its Western allies, was thrown to the German war machine, and formally lost its independence and statehood, which was restored in large parts thanks to the Soviet Union. It was thanks to the Soviet Union, thanks to steps taken by Stalin, Poland got substantial territories in the West German land. This is a fact. Western Polish territories are Stalin's gift to Poland. Have our friends in Warsaw forgotten about it? We'll give them a reminder.
We'll give them a reminder, he said. What is Putin so angry about? Polish military deployments. In recent days, Warsaw has been deploying 1,000 soldiers. They're being sent to Poland's eastern borders. This move was triggered by a video. The video showed Wagner troops training Belarusian soldiers. And where do you think that was happening? Near the Polish border. Now, when this video came out, Warsaw began bolstering its defenses and Putin does not like it. So he's making threats. But is he serious about going after Poland? It's hard to say. Remember, in the past, Russia issued similar threats against Ukraine. They blew hot and cold for years and then they decided to declare war. Having said that, Poland is not Ukraine. It is a NATO member. And if Russia strikes Poland, it will declare a direct war on NATO. So a direct attack on Poland can be ruled out, at least for now. But using Wagner soldiers cannot be ruled out. They're no longer being seen as an extended arm of the Russian state. Moscow says it has snapped ties with this group. So will a Wagner attack on Poland give Putin plausible deniability? And more importantly, can and will Putin trust Wagner and Prigozhin again to do this? Honestly, we don't have the answers. But when it comes to Putin, expect the unexpected, which is what Kiev is doing. They're not taking chances and they're going all out. Over the weekend, a cathedral in Odessa was struck. 2 people were killed. The entire structure was damaged. Zelensky has vowed retaliation, but his counter-offensive is not going well. Progress has been slow and gains have been few and far between. Ukraine blames its Western partners for the way things are going. Zelensky says the West did not give them the right amount of munitions and the training needed for this counter-offensive. So the pace of Ukraine's military action has been slow. And now Russia is threatening to hit back. Can Moscow strike a decisive blow? We say it's best to wait and watch. Meanwhile, all is not well inside Russia. First, it was Yevgeny Prigozhin. Now, another foot soldier of Vladimir Putin is facing a crackdown. His name is Igor Gerkin. He was once considered untouchable in Russia. He led a separatist force. He was the face of the Donbas uprising in 2014. In the same year, his forces shot down the Malaysian Airlines plane MH17. A total of 298 people died in that crash. Gerkin was found guilty of shooting down the plane, and back then, Vladimir Putin shielded him. The Kremlin blocked his extradition request. 8 years on, the same man has been jailed for criticizing the Russian president. So how did he fall out of favor? Our next report tells you.
Igor Gerkin has donned many hats. He was the commander of a separatist force, an FSB colonel, and later an activist and blogger. Igor the Terrible's wings have been finally clipped by Moscow. Last week, Russian officers showed up at his door and took him away. Gerkin is being accused of extremism. He faces up to 5 years in jail. But for many years, he was considered to be an untouchable. Gerkin is not your average Putin critic. He served in Russia's spy forces, the FSB. His biggest contribution was in Ukraine. In 2014, he was involved with the offensive in Crimea. In the Donbas, he fomented an uprising against Kyiv, one that led to the present conflict in Donbas. Gerkin kidnapped, tortured, and killed a lawmaker and a teenager. But that wasn't his only unforgivable sin. Gerkin's most violent crime was the shooting down of a passenger aircraft, the Malaysian airline flight MH17. The missile was launched by Gerkin and 2 other men. A court in the Netherlands wanted to jail him. There was an extradition order, but Gerkin proved to be beyond reach. Moscow rejected his extradition request. It was a reward for loyalty, perhaps, but Gerkin reciprocated with a rebellion. He has been a harsh critic of the Russian establishment. And as Russia's war in Ukraine dragged on, Gerkin has been unsparing in his criticism of Russian officials. On his blog, he has called Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, a plywood marshal. Even Vladimir Putin was attacked. Gerkin spoke about him with contempt. He accused him of incompetence and called him a non-entity and a cowardly waste of space. Gerkin had even created an online club. It was called the Club of Angry Patriots. Using this platform, Gerkin live-streamed his critique of the Russian establishment. In May, he warned that a crisis was brewing in Russia and declared his intention to join politics.
A systemic crisis is brewing in Russia, or it is already in the grip of crisis, while the temperature of society is rising. We are on the cusp of very grave internal political changes of a catastrophic character. Now, all healthy forces may and need to create organizations which will take part in the political battle, which is inevitable, and which has already started.
But those plans have been cut short. Gerkin finds himself in jail. His partner in crime too hasn't been spared. Vladimir Kvachkov. He's a retired Russian military officer. He too has been charged with discrediting the Russian army. But it is Gerkin who will be made an example of. For the longest time, his dissent was tolerated, mainly because of his links with the military and the FSB. There was an unspoken rule. Pro-war bloggers could vent as much as they liked. Within Russia, they were called the patriotic camp. But Gerkin went too far. Apparently, he already had a target on his back. From the FSB to the military chiefs, they all wanted more power to crush their critics. But they lacked the political leverage. The mutiny by the Wagner Group changed everything. Gerkin's arrest indicates there is now zero tolerance for critics in Russia.
Beaches or mountains, cats or dogs, and now Barbie or Oppenheimer. If you're on the internet, you cannot escape this question. Both movies released this weekend. Barbie is doing better overall, but in India, Oppenheimer has pulled ahead. Just one problem though. The movie has offended people in India, including Information and Broadcasting Minister Anurag Thakur. He's upset with the censor board. He wants a certain scene to be deleted. Which scene? Well, time for some context and therefore spoilers. Around 20 minutes into the movie, there is an intimate sequence, a sex scene. It involves Oppenheimer and his mistress. Midway through the scene, the woman gets up and walks over to a bookshelf. She picks up a book. It's the Bhagavad Gita, a Hindu religious text. Now, Oppenheimer could read Sanskrit. He often quoted from the Bhagavad Gita. In this scene, the woman asks him to read from it. He does so, and the intimate sequence resumes. Now, I have to tell you this. This is the PG-13 description of what happened. That's parental guidance for viewers under 13 years of age. The real version is rated R. It's very explicit and provoking. And a lot of people on social media are not happy about it. They say the movie is an insult to Hinduism. Clearly, the government feels the same way. Let's look at the technicalities first. Oppenheimer is rated R in Western countries, meaning it is restricted for children and teenagers. But in India, the movie is rated UA. What does that mean? UA means unrestricted public exhibition. Children above the age of 12 can watch it alone. What explains this contrast in ratings? Well, the makers of the film made some cuts for India, some voluntary cuts. And thanks to those cuts, the movie got the UA rating. But the Bhagavad Gita scene stayed in. Clearly, the makers and the censor board thought it was fine. But does the audience agree? Well, this is where public opinion is divided. One section says, what is the big deal? It's just art, watch it and forget it, move on. Another section says, it's religion and faith. You cannot use art as an excuse to insult it. So which side is right? I think we can all agree that freedom of expression is not limitless. Your words have consequences. Your actions have fallouts. So the line must be drawn somewhere. The only question is where. Is combining nudity and the Bhagavad Gita beyond that line? Well, for many Indians, yes, it is. There are thousands of people who read the Gita every day, who live by its lessons, or at least try to, who consider it pure and inviolable. For them, this is an insult. It's like demeaning their belief system. Does that mean we should censor this movie? Well, the government certainly thinks so. They seem to be keen on it. Reports say some officials at the censor board could be in trouble. The government wants to know why this scene was not removed from the film. We'll have to wait for their explanation. In the meantime, let's focus on the filmmakers. They chose self-censorship in India. No one asked them to snip or blur anything. The makers did it themselves. Why? Because they wanted to reach more people, a wider section of the audience. They wanted fewer restrictions. Why not do the same for the Bhagavad Gita scene? It has zero impact on storytelling. The makers wanted to show Oppenheimer's proficiency in Sanskrit, his interest in the Gita. Great. But why do that in the middle of a sex scene? I'm sure he read the Gita elsewhere too. So the makers made a conscious choice. They decided to fetishize a holy book. It was the Bhagavad Gita in this movie. Could it be the Bible or the Quran in the next one? And I wonder how that will go. Our question is quite simple. What is the point of this? Is it just to insult and provoke? Because this scene is not fundamental to the story. It doesn't question religious dogmas or customs. Neither does it pose any important questions. It's just there for the sake of it. And we get that movies have always pushed the limits of what is acceptable, sometimes with great results. They've questioned blind faith. They've ripped apart oppressive customs. But all of that had a reason. It had logic. In this case, there seems to be none. While writing any scene, filmmakers usually ask questions like, why is this happening? Why is the character doing what he or she is doing? In this case, the question seems to be, why not? Why not fetishize the Bhagavad Gita? Why not provoke? Well, this provocation for the sake of it is problematic. And it can be a slippery slope on matters of faith and insensitive societies. So what's the solution? Maybe try to understand Indian sensitivities better. See it as more than a big market for your movies. Try to understand the pulse and respect the faith. If not, this won't be a one-off. As for the Censor Board of India, they have questions to answer. Their job is to strike a balance, promote art and expression, yet ensure that no one is insulted. I'm not saying it's an easy job, but they signed up for it, and in this case, they've messed up. And speaking of messing up badly, Manipur's chief minister still hasn't resigned. His state has been burning since May this year. Mobs are razing entire villages. Women are being raped and paraded naked. But guess what the chief minister is doing? Today he was flagging off trains. I guess riots or not, the show will go on. Last week, a horrifying video emerged from Manipur. It showed two women being paraded naked by a mob of men. One of them was gang raped. You can see around 25 people in the video, but the mob itself had around 800 people. And how many has the state government arrested so far? 6. All that talk of strict action has led to nothing. Chief Minister Biren Singh said capital punishment was on the table. Well, for that, you need to catch the culprits first. Honestly, he should have resigned last week. It was under his watch that things escalated. It was his leadership that made things worse. Yet there is zero accountability. And you know what? Don't even listen to journalists or activists. Listen to your own party lawmakers. A BJP MLA from Manipur has written an opinion piece about the violence. Let me quote from what he said. A biased government anywhere is detrimental to peace, and although such bias was always present in some degree in Manipur, it accentuated under the current chief minister. What more do you need? An MLA is placing the blame on his own chief minister. He says the state is helping Meitei radicals. A quick side note, the Meiteis are the dominant group in the state of Manipur. They're facing off against Kuki tribals. The violence has claimed around 140 lives, and last week evidence of sexual violence emerged when 2 Kuki women were paraded naked. This incident happened in the month of May, but the video emerged only last week. Some groups in Manipur say this was not a one-off. They claim at least 7 Kuki women have been raped since May. And what does the chief minister have to say about that? He says it is not true. Only one incident has been reported, and that's it. The fact is, the chief minister has no credibility left. The Kuki community does not trust him. His own lawmakers say he's making things worse and the violence is not ending. If not now, then when will Biren Singh resign? Until now, the violence was limited to Manipur, but for how much longer? The Meitei community in neighboring Mizoram is fleeing, and I'll tell you why. The Mizo share close relations with the Kukis. There's an ethnic bond between them. So after last week's video, things are frosty. Mizo militants issued a warning on Friday. They asked Meiteis in Mizoram to leave the state. And the state government tried to assure them, but no luck. Many Meiteis have already started leaving, and guess who is offering to help them? The government of Manipur. Chief Minister Biren Singh says he could charter flights. I'm sure he means well, but this reminds me of the safety advisory before taking a plane. First, wear your own oxygen mask, then try to help people around you. Someone tell that to the Manipur government. They have help from the army. They have help from the intelligence agencies. They also have hundreds of police officers at their disposal, yet the state is burning. We thought last week's video would have changed things. Maybe the chief minister would resign or the police would speed things up. But we were wrong. Only 6 of the culprits have been arrested. The rest are still at large, and who knows, maybe terrorizing more women. Manipur and its people are demanding justice, but Chief Minister Biren Singh cannot seem to give them that. You need trust and compassion to resolve such conflicts. The Chief Minister has neither. He's been called a part of the problem. How then can he offer a solution? And now on to West Asia. Yesterday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in the hospital. He was getting a surgery to fit a pacemaker. Normally, you would take a few days off after an operation like that, but not Netanyahu. He could not afford to do that. So he went straight from the hospital to the parliament. Why? Because today Israel is voting on a set of controversial judicial reforms. It has already approved a key clause. Now, these are reforms that Netanyahu has been pushing for months and reforms that have triggered Israel's biggest protests in the country's history. So, what are these reforms about? The judiciary. The Israeli government wants to change how the judiciary functions. They think the courts are too powerful, so they want to curb that power. But the people of Israel are having none of it. They say such a move would undermine Israel's democracy. So, thousands of people have been protesting since the beginning of this year. We're nearly halfway through the year. But the protests have not stopped. In fact, they've just intensified.
We are here today fighting for our democracy in a non-violent way. We are protecting our country from dictatorship. We will not give up until we are victorious.
I came here to protest against the dictatorship that's becoming of my country. And I came to Jerusalem because this is the most important city of the country, and I want my country to continue living under a democracy.
The scenes playing out in Israel are truly dramatic. Thousands are out on the streets, protests in every major city, scuffles with the police, and a call to save democracy. Netanyahu is the longest serving prime minister of this country. He's faced a lot of protests in his career, but things have never been this bad. That's because some sections of the Israeli society usually never involve themselves in politics. But this time, even they are protesting. I'm talking about the likes of tech executives, former politicians, and most importantly, the Israeli army. The military is often known as Israel's backbone, the most powerful force in all of West Asia. They fight battles for the state, but this time they're fighting against the state. The judicial reforms have deeply divided the Israeli army. The reservists say they will not show up for duty if these reforms are passed. And this includes fighter pilots and members of the intelligence. And here's something you must know. Military service in Israel is compulsory. All citizens above the age of 18 must serve at least for 3 years. But many continue to be in reserve duty for much longer. So these reserve forces are a critical resource. They're an important backup for the regular army of Israel. If the reservists do not show up, it would shake up the entire system. And are they serious about not showing up? Well, that too is a matter of debate. Many believe these are just threats. But the images tell another story.
We're trying to do our best in order to protect democracy in our country.
This seems to be the universal sentiment. People from every section of the society are protesting. But the Prime Minister remains adamant. He wants to go forward with the reform. And we'll tell you the reason why. Netanyahu came to power in December last year. But his party did not have a majority. So he formed a coalition government. And this is not new in Israel. Every government in the country has been a coalition government. No party has won simple majority in the history of Israel. So Netanyahu stitched a coalition, and he wasn't spoiled for choice. In order to come to power, he tied up with a group of radical right-wing parties. It gave him the prime minister's title. But this alliance is now coming back to bite him. Netanyahu's allies insist on this reform. If he fails to push it, they've threatened to pull support. So the Prime Minister is caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. With the reforms, he loses public support. Without the reforms, he loses coalition support. So he wants them passed to remain in power. He also faces major corruption charges. Curbing the power of the courts will help him in that case too. So it's his dare against the political odds. But will it work? Benjamin Netanyahu rose to power as the protector of Israeli patriotism. It's something he talks about a lot. But the army is seen as the biggest symbol of patriotism in Israel. And if the same army opposes the reforms, it could spiral into a national security situation. Will that finally force Netanyahu to backtrack? By the looks of it, not yet. What's the easiest job in the world? It's not a trick question. The answer is an expert. Don't ask which field or what discipline, just nod and move on. Some of these self-proclaimed experts also cover geopolitics. They write op-eds and dish out advice. Let me introduce you to one such piece. It was published by The Economist last week. Look at the headline. What India-China détente means for the West. Our first reaction was surprise. If there was a détente, no one told us. So we read on to find out what it was about. We expected some big revelation to emerge, maybe Indian officials secretly traveling to China, or maybe signing some top secret deal. Turns out there was none of that. In fact, there was no détente. The entire article is a huge exercise in what if. It basically says that America is making a bad bet on India. Why? Because India and China are resolving their issues. Once they're friends again, India will not help the US, not with Taiwan, not with supply chains, and not even with climate change. But like I said, there is no evidence to back this up. This article mentions just two parameters. One is bilateral trade. It reached $136 billion last year. Apparently, that means India and China are friends again. And two, the military disengagement. India and China have held 18 rounds of talks. The article notes that both sides have withdrawn from 5 flashpoints, only 2 remain. These points are presented as evidence, proof of a so-called Himalayan thaw. So let's do something. Let's use the same logic for US-China relations. We'll start with bilateral trade. It reached around $690 billion last year. US-China trade, $690 billion. It's a new record. Trade is rising despite political tensions and a trade war. Second, engagement and talks. 3 top US officials have visited China in less than 1 month. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Treasury Chief Janet Yellen, and climate envoy John Kerry. Plus 100-year-old Henry Kissinger. He made the trip to Beijing. Does this mean China and the US are friends again? Well, far from it. They're one miscalculation away from war. My point is, India is not the only country talking to China. Others, including the US, are doing the same. In fact, India has more reasons to do so. In 2020, there were deadly clashes between India and China, the Galwan Valley clashes. And since then, both sides have built up their military presence, more soldiers, more weapons, more patrols. And this was never going to be a long-term solution. You can't have 2 nuclear powers facing off constantly, so the de-escalation is not some symbolic event. It was bound to happen. But the article completely misses that point. And there are 2 problems in this report. One, there was no détente. India and China are on 2 different pages. China says, forget the border, let's increase trade and cooperation. But India says, settle the border first, only then can we move on to other things. And this position has been reiterated multiple times, including by the Prime Minister himself. Prime Minister Modi gave an interview ahead of his trip to the United States. Listen to what he said. For normal bilateral ties with China, peace and tranquility in the border areas are essential. Did the Economist not see this, or did they choose to ignore it? I know we focused on the Economist in this story, but the magazine is not alone. Multiple Western media outlets and think tanks have done the same. Look at foreign policy. Is America making a bad bet on India, they said. It says, New Delhi will never side with Washington against Beijing. Which brings us to the second problem with such articles, the Western blinkers. Indian foreign policy serves Indian interests, not American, not Chinese, not Russian. Why does that surprise the Western media so much? Their governments have broken out of the Cold War mentality, at least some of them have, but they still haven't. They look at foreign policy as bloc politics. You're either with us or against us. India refuses to play that game. It does oppose China, but for completely different reasons. Western media and leaders need to understand that. There is no thaw or détente between India and China. Things are still frosty, and even if there is, Western leaders will have to take a call. Are they friends with India only to tackle China? Or do they see beyond that? India is also the world's largest democracy, an emerging market with a robust industrial base. I'm sure that counts for something. So Western media needs to stop sabotaging India's ties with the West. You can't pass off guesswork as expert opinion. And now to another fishy story. This one is from Japan, and it's literally fishy. It involves a black rockfish caught on the 18th of May. Why is this fish making headlines? Because it contains a radioactive material called cesium, and a lot of it, 180 times the safety limit, 180 times. And where was it caught? Near the drainage outlets of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, the one that was damaged due to an earthquake and tsunami in 2011, the one making news for radioactive water. This power plant has millions of tons of radioactive water. Japan is set to release it into the sea, and countries in the neighborhood are protesting. The fishing community in Japan is also protesting, and now this radioactive fish has triggered more fears. Here's a report.
On March 11, 2011, a devastating earthquake took place off Japan's eastern coast. It was the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan. It lasted for 6 minutes and caused a tsunami. And the waves of both the quake and the tsunami hit this place. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The result was the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. There were 3 nuclear reactor meltdowns. There were hydrogen explosions. The tsunami's waters flooded the reactors. It got contaminated with radioactive material, and the waters then swept this material into the Pacific Ocean. Why are we talking about the past? It's because the effects of the disaster are not a thing of the past. Even today, the Fukushima disaster makes itself felt, especially in the marine life near the nuclear plant. When the tsunami's water receded, it took some radioactive material from the plant along with it. Among other things, cesium-137 entered the Pacific Ocean. It's a radioactive byproduct of nuclear power generation. And like all radioactive material, it has the potential to cause cancer and other life-threatening ailments. In normal circumstances, radioactive waste like cesium-137 is stored securely, so that it cannot contaminate the environment. But the tsunami wrecked that plan. The cesium spilled into the ocean. Since then, it has been contaminating the local marine life. 12 years later, we still get reports of rockfish found with 180 times the Japanese government's legal limit of cesium. What's the maximum allowed limit? 100 becquerels per kg. Radioactivity is measured in the unit becquerels. 100 becquerels per kg is the legal limit in Japan. And the fish found in May contained 18,000 becquerels per kg. Between May 2022 and May 2023, 44 fish with cesium exceeding the legal limit have been found. Japan has been struggling to deal with this problem. In February 2022, black rockfish shipments from Fukushima were suspended. That's after a highly contaminated fish had been found in January that year. The shipments have not resumed yet. So you see how the Fukushima disaster has had long-term consequences on safety and economic activity even over a decade later. Now, the 2011 disaster was an accident. Japan did not mean to release radioactive material into the ocean then, but it wants to intentionally do so now. Because over the years it has been collecting nuclear wastewater. That's water used to cool the nuclear reactors. It has been accumulating for years, and Japan wants to release it into the Pacific Ocean. This water has been treated. Most of the extremely dangerous radioactive particles have been removed, but it still contains traces of tritium. That's a radioactive form of hydrogen. There reportedly won't be too much tritium in the wastewater, but it will definitely be there. So Japan's neighboring countries have opposed the idea. They're worried about the possible side effect. Now Japan says it's safe. And Tokyo does have the go-ahead from the global nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Well, the transboundaryness, if the word exists in English, the transboundary nature must be addressed. Our opinion is that given the degree, the dilution degree and the dispersion, it could be the case that there is no transboundary effect at all.
But the IAEA chief did understand why Japan's neighbors like China and South Korea were protesting.
Given the extremely low levels of the radioisotopes, the radionuclides, that I mentioned, the dispersion might be almost complete or indiscernible within a few miles from the coast. So perhaps no transboundary effect. Potentially there is one, so this is why these countries want to have the guarantee.
And he says that perhaps there will be no transboundary effect. It's not a guarantee. It's more like an experiment. Japan can just hope for the best and rely on stringent testing in the future. But once the wastewater is released, the damage will have been done. And the consequences are likely to be felt even decades later.
And now let's talk about Cambodia. Yesterday, they had an election. Cambodia's ruling party won by a landslide. They had no real opposition to begin with, so the outcome was never in doubt. But still, there will be a change of guard. Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Sen is set to hand over the reins to his son. His name is Hun Manet. He is the head of the country's army. Why is Hun Sen making this change? How will it impact the future of Cambodia? Our next story brings you the details.
Cambodia. It's a Southeast Asian nation of almost 17 million people, located between Thailand, Laos and Vietnam. Cambodia's government shares the region's aversion to democracy. This was proven once again during Sunday's election. Prime Minister Hun Sen once again tightened his firm grip on Cambodia. He ran against virtually no opposition. Hun and his lackey courts have imprisoned or disqualified any real contenders. His Cambodian People's Party claims they have won 120 out of the country's 125 parliamentary seats, which is actually 5 less than during the 2018 election. His party had swept all 125 seats then, again with no real opposition. Now, Hun has extended his 38-year-long reign. He's already Asia's longest-serving leader, having taken power in 1985. And since then, he has steadily been whittling away at Cambodia's democratic institutions.
He is a leader who came of age in a context of conflict in Cambodia in the 1950s and 60s, and the experience of the battlefield has infused Hun Sen's approach to politics. He has always seen it as a zero-sum game, a fight to the death, in many cases literally, with his opponents. And he has not shirked from using the full force of the security state to consolidate his hold on power and eliminate potential sources of opposition.
1993 was the last time Hun didn't win an election outright. He had to share power with a rival party. But he made short work of them in 1997 by launching a coup, and his power has been unchecked ever since. Now you may wonder, how has he been able to get away with all this for so long? Where is the West, who preaches democracy and free and fair elections? They're still preaching, but from a distance. The US has said that Cambodia's election was neither free nor fair. Washington says it will put visa bans on some people who undermined democracy. It also plans to pause some foreign assistance programs in Cambodia. So some people will get penalized, some aid will stop flowing. But for the most part, nothing will change. The UK issued an even weaker rebuke. It said the election was not free nor fair, and it was a missed opportunity to strengthen Cambodia's democracy. That's all. So why is the West so shy when it comes to criticizing Cambodia and Hun Sen? Because he has successfully managed to pit the West against his biggest backer, China.
As a good neighbor and friend, we warmly congratulate Cambodia on successfully holding the 7th national election, and the Cambodian People's Party under the leadership of Chairman Hun Sen on winning the election.
China has spent years propping up Hun Sen and investing in Cambodia. The US wants to fight China's influence, so it treats Cambodia with kid gloves and keeps sending financial aid. It's a battle of influence, and Hun Sen is the biggest winner. So he's hoping to pass on this success to his eldest son, Hun Manet. He is presently Cambodia's army chief. That's the standard nepotism route to power in most dictatorships. Now he's poised to succeed his father. Hun Sen had earlier hinted that the transition could happen as soon as this August. But there's no official plan in place yet. And it isn't just Hun Sen who'll be stepping down. Reports say a changing of the guard is imminent. Senior Cambodian politicians are about to step down and hand the country over to their children. The old guard will give way to the new one. Of course, none of this is normal. It's a throwback to monarchies, but none of that matters to Cambodia or Hasn. As long as he manages to balance China and the US, nothing will stop him from crowning his son the next ruler.
For our last story tonight, let's talk about the future. It is fickle. We can never really see it. So we try to imagine what the future may look like. A few years ago, scientists tried to imagine what the future of our world will be like. It looked apocalyptic, to say the least. They said if things go as they have, our world would be about 5 degrees hotter by the end of the century. They warned of food crises, extreme heat, economic turmoil, even state conflict. Basically, the stuff of nightmares. But what felt like a nightmare then is quickly becoming our reality. Our world is already 1.2 degrees hotter than the pre-industrial age, that's before the 18th century. Scientists say it is warming up further and faster. Within a century, the Earth could be 2 or 3 degrees hotter. And for a long time, this gradual change felt distant, both in terms of space and time. But now, it's barging into our lives and our homes. Disasters seem to be piling up and daily headlines are blurring together. Italy has been hit by hailstones the size of tennis balls. This comes just days after a brutal heat wave which broke temperature records in Rome. Greece endured its hottest July in 50 years. Wildfires have been burning for over a week in this country. Spain's coastal waters hit new temperature records. A brutal heat wave is sweeping most of the US. Southwestern cities are breaking temperature records. Meanwhile, flood waters are drowning parts of the Indian state of Gujarat. The capital, New Delhi, recorded its wettest July in 40 years. In Beijing, residents are flocking to underground shelters to escape the heat. Such extremes have become a daily affair all over the world. And they're hurting us in more ways than we acknowledge. Climate extremes pose the biggest threat, health threat of this century. Extreme weather has killed 2 million people in the last 50 years, 2 million. These deaths are linked to events like floods and heat strokes. Also mosquitoes. As temperatures rise, mosquitoes are on the move. This leads to more cases of malaria and dengue. Did you know that about half the world's population is now at risk? According to the World Health Organization, dengue cases could reach a record high this year. In 2022, there were more than 4 million cases. That's an 8-fold rise in the last 2 decades. All of these are record-breaking changes. Yes, yet it's business as usual for our governments. The lack of action is exasperating. Let me show you the most recent example. The G20 energy meeting was held in India this weekend. It failed to reach a consensus on phasing out fossil fuels. G20 countries contribute to over 3/4 of the global GDP and global emissions, but they cannot agree on how to fight climate change. Global greenhouse gas emissions need to drop by 45% this decade. But at the current rate, they will increase by 14%. So inaction is bad. I'll tell you what's worse. Toying with the climate in the name of bringing solutions, that is worse. Case in point, Mexico. The country is facing a historic heat wave. It suffered months of drought. And what does the government do? Cloud seeding. That's where you fly planes through clouds to increase rainfall. The government says it's an effective step, and for the farmers who have lost their livelihood, it's a saving grace. But is artificially increasing rainfall good enough? Scientists are skeptical. They say this is a short-term solution. What you need is broader, more effective climate action, but governments tend to chase quick fixes. I have other examples for you. The US, for instance, wants to block sunlight to cool down the earth. China is trying to modify the weather. It did so over 500,000 times between 2002 and 2012. In 2021, it cleared the skies ahead of a political celebration. These plans sound fascinating. They're very costly. And in the long term, they can be dangerous too. Also, they're no substitute for real climate action. Think about it. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Peru. Anti-government protests have escalated in the country. Women have taken to the streets to demand the president's resignation. Meanwhile, drone footage from Russia shows the world's biggest permafrost crater. It is expanding at an alarming rate because of global warming. Permafrost is any ground that remains completely frozen at 0 degrees Celsius for at least 2 years straight. In Argentina, a woman narrowly escaped a major car accident. We'll show you the CCTV footage. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1969, astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins successfully returned to the Earth after landing on the moon. They splashed the Pacific Ocean after spending over 8 days in space. And with that, the final leg of Apollo 11 came to a historic end. We call it a wrap. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi made a historic trip to France. He was the guest of honor for the Bastille Day celebrations. It was a special invite by French President Emmanuel Macron. Indian military contingents took part in the parade. 3 Rafale fighter jets of the Indian Air Force also took part. In the backdrop of the visit, some major defense purchases took place. India's Defence Acquisition Council, or DAC, cleared the purchase of 26 Rafale aircraft and 3 Scorpene submarines from France. The fresh order of 26 Rafales is different. India already operates the Rafale. The Indian Air Force has 36 of them, or 2 squadrons. Now the Indian Navy will also get its hands on the French aircraft. New Delhi has placed an order for the maritime Rafale variant, also known as Rafale M, where M stands for Marine. These are different from the Rafales currently operated by the Indian Air Force. The Rafale M is a maritime aircraft. It is suitable for undertaking aircraft carrier operations. It can conduct STOBAR operations. STOBAR stands for Short Takeoff but Arrested Recovery. The aircraft can take off from the short airstrip on aircraft carriers. The landing gear of the aircraft is reinforced for this purpose. It is hardened to withstand the short takeoff and landing. A ramp is then used to launch the aircraft overboard the ship. These aircraft will also have to land on the aircraft carrier. This is possible because of arrested recovery. The underbelly of the aircraft sports a hook. Upon landing, the hook engages with cables that are spread out on the aircraft carrier deck. These cables act as additional brakes. The aircraft's momentum is absorbed by the wires, and this is what the Rafale M does differently from its other version. All Rafales are equipped with the ASAR radar. ASAR is short for Active Electronically Scanned Array. This radar helps the pilot to track multiple targets, including targets that emit different frequencies. ASAR is the most advanced and sophisticated military radar in use. Apart from the Indian Air Force, the Indian Navy will also benefit from this technology. Rafale M also comes with a specialized electronic warfare suite. This is used for jamming radars and sensors of ships, confusing them about the whereabouts of the Rafale. To complement the tech, Rafales are equipped with some of the most lethal weapon systems. Rafales for the Indian Air Force have the deadly Meteor missile. The Meteor is an air-to-air missile. It can be fired from beyond the visual range of the pilot. This means pilots can shoot down targets that are really far away, almost more than 100 kilometers. The Meteor is so advanced that the adversary may not be aware when the missile is fired. So the Indian Rafale can fire the missile and head back home safely without the adversary getting a chance to hit back. Because the Meteor gives Rafales an aerial advantage, adversaries will not get a chance for close combat. This is the Rafale's standoff advantage. So will the maritime Rafales also be equipped with the Meteor? Yes, they will. But the Rafale M will have a dedicated maritime weapons package. It will be equipped with the Exocet missile. The Exocet is an anti-ship missile. It's designed to destroy frigates, destroyers and corvettes. The Exocet can hit naval vessels almost 70 kilometers away. It can be actively guided via radar. Once it has locked onto the target, the pilot need not guide the missile anymore. This means after its initial flight stage, the Exocet is capable of hitting the target without guidance. This is what makes the missile so lethal. And each maritime Rafale can carry one Exocet missile at a time. The Indian Air Force and Navy will both operate Rafales. They will also share training modules for the aircraft. Aviators of both the services will be familiar with each other's jets. Currently, only the Indian Air Force has Rafale trainers, or the twin-seater Rafales. These are specially used for pilot training. There are no trainer variants for the Rafale M. Even the French Navy relies on its Air Force to train Rafale pilots. New Delhi has placed an order for 4 more Rafale trainers. This is included in the order for 26 maritime Rafales. These 4 new trainers will have India-specific modifications and will be used for training pilots for the Navy and the Air Force. So, what led India to pick the Rafale for its Navy? The French fighter trumped American and Russian jets. Rafale was up against America's premium fighter jet, the F-18 Super Hornet. Russia's naval MiG-29 variant was also in the run. However, the Indian Navy already operates the MiG-29 and was looking for a more modern jet. The final showdown was between the Rafale and the F-18. The Rafale ultimately won the deal. This is because of a few reasons. The French fighter is larger than the American jet. It can carry a heavier payload, and it'll integrate well with the Indian Air Force, especially during joint maritime missions. History and relations also played a key factor. France has been India's strategic partner for years. The two nations have long-standing diplomatic ties. France was the only Western nation that didn't sanction India after the 1998 nuclear tests. Paris and New Delhi have a history of defense cooperation. India purchased some of its earliest naval fighter jets from France. This was the French-made Elise aircraft. The Elise operated from India's aircraft carrier Vikrant. Elise also took part in many military campaigns. These were the 1961 liberation of the state of Goa and the 1971 India-Pakistan War. During the 1971 war, French-made Elise participated in operations on the Eastern Front, what is now known as Bangladesh. The next major fighter aircraft was the Mirage. This delta-wing jet came to India in the 1980s. It was instrumental in the 1999 Kargil War. The Mirage was used to drop laser-guided bombs. This was the first time India undertook a mission of its kind. Mirage continues to serve in the Indian Air Force. It was the platform of choice for the Balakot strikes in 2019. Another French aircraft has been heavily deployed in India's north. And it's a helicopter, the Aloot, locally known as the Chetak. It has been extensively deployed in the Himalayas, particularly in the Siachen Glacier. These light helicopters have been instrumental in supporting ground forces at high altitudes. History shows that French aircraft have served India well, and the Rafale will continue this legacy. Along with the Rafale M, India has opted for another French-made naval weaponry, the Scorpene submarine. New Delhi will purchase 3 Scorpene submarines. These submarines are part of India's I-75 project. This allows the transfer of technology to India. The Scorpions will be made in India. This will be done at the Masgaon dockyard in Mumbai. India had previously ordered 6 Scorpions. 5 of them are currently in service. The Scorpion is an advanced conventional submarine. They can operate without refueling for nearly 50 days. These submarines are stealthy and fast and are great for anti-submarine operations along with long-range strikes. Scorpions are capable of carrying torpedoes and ballistic missiles. They also have advanced surveillance and tracking mechanisms. India has requested specific modifications to the Scorpion. This includes a new air-independent propulsion system, which will allow the submarine to stay submerged even longer. The Scorpion will boost the Indian Navy's capabilities, and France has a major role to play in it. These defense purchases are a shot in the arm for New Delhi. Rafales are a game changer for India. They will now be deployed on multiple fronts. The jets will serve as a deterrent in the Himalayas and will become the Indian Navy's primary fighter jets. They will be tasked to operate across the Indian Ocean and will act as a force multiplier along with the Scorpions. France and India are deepening their defense cooperation. The two countries are in talks for a joint fighter jet engine. French aerospace firm Safran and India's Defense Research and Development Organization, or the DRDO, have plans to jointly make a fighter engine. This engine will power India's homegrown fighter jets. Safran will also work with India for helicopter engines, as New Delhi looks to develop its indigenous helicopter program. India considers France as more than just an ally. For New Delhi, Paris is a friend. Apart from military deals, India and France are closer than ever, with Indian Airlines buying Airbus planes in bulk to France opening its markets to India's UPI. The bond between the two nations is getting stronger, marking a new era for New Delhi and Paris. Russia continued with its missile attacks on Ukraine's port city of Odessa. At least 1 person was killed, another 20 people were injured. Ukraine claims 6 houses and an apartment building were destroyed by Russian missiles. Odessa's historic cathedral was also damaged after the strikes caused its roof to collapse.